Are we recording this? God damn it, John Quick.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's Meagan Washington's dulcet tones soothing you into this episode.
Hello.
It's all you, Meagan.
Are we recording an April Fool's episode? Does that land on a Wednesday?
Yeah, no.
That's a Sunday.
That's a Sunday.
Oh, good. All right.
We can make him think it's a Wednesday.
It'll be the day after my birthday, which, by the way, this is our intro to Discovery.
We should probably start over.
No.
We're
just committed. Continue.
We're in too deep. This is our special edition episode 1 where we examine.
Look, we thought things were getting a little bit too heavy. Plus Discovery's on hiatus, so we thought we'd inject some levity, and it turns into a deep philosophical conversation about the merits of utopianism versus, a hard look at humanity.
AKA, we're watching an episode of the original series.
We're watching the original series. It's a great thing. It's a magical thing. It's a brilliant episode. I might have picked one of the best episodes.
And this episode was called.
This one is The Devil in the Dark.
And yeah, we get into it. We definitely do. We break down this episode, so spoilers for this episode of the original series if you have not seen it.
Look, it's been out for what?
Decades.
It came out in 68, I want to say.
No, honestly, at this point, we can throw out the spoiler disclaimer. I have no sympathy.
I'm not. It's 50 years old, man.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it, then
get thee to the Netflix.
Yeah, come on, get with it. Let's go.
So if anybody's wanting to watch, this one is episode 26, I believe.
On Netflix, yeah.
On Netflix.
On Netflix, you are correct.
And it's amazing. It's brilliant. It's fascinating. Everybody loved it.
It was. I did enjoy this episode. It was great to actually sit with you guys and enjoy an episode of Star Trek.
It was fantastic.
That was a lot. That was actually quite a bit of fun. So. I hope you guys will enjoy listening to it as well. So, shall we hit Warp 9?
No, they didn't go Warp 9 in the original series. We did Warp 5. Go fuck yourself.
Yeah, little bit. All right, fine. Warp 5. Now, welcome to Discovering Discovery Special Edition. Until the second season comes out, we are going to be just round tabling about, possibly having some special guests, and we're going to be watching selected episodes from other Star Trek series and possibly movies. This week's selection comes to you from Miss Meagan Washington. Meagan, what can you tell us about this episode?
Well, naturally, I had to make you guys watch some of the original series because you've both strangely missed out on it.
'Cause life? Yeah, that'll happen.
Yeah, I don't know why you weren't watching it when you were kids. That's just weird. So I picked one of my favorite episodes. And this one was The Devil in the Dark, which is from the first season of the original series. And it's kind of a horror episode.
It is a little bit. It is... watching it as a person that has watched now many other Star Trek series, including I'm almost through Voyager. I've seen all, of course, DS9 and all of Enterprise. I now see where the DNA came from, and the major plot twist of this episode I definitely did see coming, but I think I only saw it coming because I'm looking at the genesis of many of our great TV tropes.
Yes.
This is where it all began.
Yes.
When this was written in the 60s, which it surprised me that this was an episode made in the 60s because the pacing was very, very good. The acting was on point and the writing was really, really well done. I was just like, this is a 60s television show?
Yes.
Yeah, man, it's great.
Well, I think it benefited from the fact that when you're doing a sci-fi show, you're really allowed to take risks telling a story, and even cinematically, that break with convention. And there are things that are happening in television and films now that I saw in this episode. For instance, their use of shadows in the tunnels, their use of certain push-ins, the ability of Spock to emote even though you're not really facing his face. A lot of key things that we use today, and both in cinema and in TV, and some of the best TV and cinema use. I guarantee you, if you put side-by-side frames of one of your best shows of today next to the scenes and shots from this episode, you're going to see some parallels and some throwbacks and homages to that.
Yeah, so let's kind of like break down the episode. Megan, you want to take us on a lead on this like kind of plot point by plot point?
Yeah,
Take us on a tour.
Yeah.
So this episode starts on a mining planet. And basically, they mine ore for the Federation.
Yeah,
It's like super ore. It's like everything. This is like the super fruit of ore planets. It's everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that they weren't mining dilithium, which has become like now the
That's their go-to.
the technobabble ore of the future.
And that is one of the things that is disappointing about the more recent series, is they kind of take away the details of the original series. You know, it's just like, we need a thing that happens. It's like, okay, it's dilithium, something's happening with that, like we know that one,
Keep it moving.
Yeah.
you know. And so they don't take the time to be like, okay, well, let's like think up something new that we could use, you know, let's think up something different that we could create to
And
go
they
with
assume
this.
we have enough science in here, damn it. We
Yes.
have enough.
Yeah, so they just keep kind of rehashing the exact same things over and over and over again. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, in Discovery, you don't really see any other alien races. You see the Klingons. You're like, okay.
We saw the Orions in the very last episode.
You saw the Orions in the last episode. You saw an
The space
Andorian
cow.
once.
Yeah.
You did for like 2 episodes, and then they got rid of it.
Yeah.
Well,
You know?
we had the space whale, which showed up in the one like fantastic episode. But let's enough of hating
No,
on Discovery.
I'm not hating on it. I'm not hating on it. I'm just
Yeah.
as like an example. I mean, there's so much that you get out of an episode like this, and then in that one you're like, okay, but you know, there's 5 different species we can think of. So with this one, they're at this, you know, this mining planet. It's kind of got everything going on, and it kind of does a cold open. There's, oh gosh, what was his name?
It's like Schmetty or Schmitty.
Like Schmurder.
Schmeckel.
Just basically, mofo who's going to die horribly first.
Statistic number 1, but more or less.
Yeah.
He
it's
was,
like-
he was a red shirt without
Yeah.
the glory of a red shirt.
None of the glory of the red shirt. You died screaming, sir.
Look, the man was concerned. He didn't want to be there.
I love how they left him down there all alone. And just like,
No,
if
but-
phaser fire doesn't work on this thing. He's
but
like,
check
don't
it out.
worry about it. We'll be back here in 3
No,
minutes.
it said,
And he's like,
don't
"A lot-"
worry. Yeah, a lot can happen in 3 minutes.
He says, like, yeah, Schmetty says a lot can happen in 3 minutes. And the guy just pats him on the shoulder. Like,
Peace out.
He's like, fuck you.
They're like, look, dinner's almost done. You drew the short straw. You're staying down here.
It bees that way.
Good news is they got back to, you know, his crispified corpse in less than 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Gotta give him that much.
They got back there in
Okay,
about
so-
20 seconds. Like, wait a minute, what's going on? What's that screaming?
So as they're leaving, and this is a cold open, mind you, another thing that they've gotten rid of in the new series. So basically they're leaving.
Well, yes and no, not entirely in the new series. It's off and on, but they haven't entirely gotten rid of it.
Every now and then, that one episode I liked had one. So he basically gets jumped. This terrifying creature, we don't see it. It comes out of nowhere, and poor Shimmerling,
Gets vaporized.
he is
It's
no more.
hard.
So by the time they get back to the body, it's just a smoking pile of ash.
I mean,
essentially.
you would hope that you know, however this thing kills, it burns so far so fast that it's just like and you're out. You don't really
I don't
feel
imagine he
pain.
felt a lot of pain.
Yeah, it's just everything is like the biggest pain he felt. I'm pretty sure was his heart beating and shock.
Yeah, I think it was shock, and then it was done. Like, I don't think the pain set in yet. So they're just like, look, it's okay. The Enterprise is on its way. They're going to sort this out. And lo and behold, the Enterprise arrives.
Shows up.
Yeah.
They show up. They beam down to the planet, and they go and talk to the head engineer. He gives them kind of a summary of what's going on. Bones goes off to
Do bone stuff.
he's checking out,
Yeah.
he goes off to check out the remains. They don't do a glory kind of showing of the body, which is something else that has kind of been lost in time to television.
Well, also, I think it's a combination of A, censors, why do we have to show this? And B, today, well, we can show this now. We can show this and make it look good now. So it's that duality of, well, we didn't show it because we couldn't and because we can't make it look good. We're showing it now
it's like a
because we can.
combination of like we didn't like either we couldn't make it look good enough or we didn't actually need to show it versus now where they're just like, yeah, just show it and there's no imagination kind of.
Exactly.
It's like you see everything and you're like, yeah, that's cool. It's neat that we can see it and that it looks that good. But at the same time, like,
exactly.
isn't it more terrifying if we don't know? Like in this one, you don't see the monster until well over halfway through the episode.
And what this benefits from is the fact that when you do see the monster, normally, creatures of this era of television, I mean, come on, we're talking about, like Doctor Who era, original series era. These guys don't have, tons of budgets for these things. I mean, they don't have the Creature from the Black Lagoon budget, so they do the best with what they can, and they accomplish this well by hiding it from you until you absolutely have to see it. And then they use the cutting and the music and the shot to really emphasize it, and that helps.
Yeah, it builds it up, and it is, it's a very foreign creature. Like they talk about science stuff, real science in terms of
Quite thoroughly,
the composition of the creature that they're still kind of running into now, whether or not that's actually a possibility
And throughout
for a life form to be like a silicone life form versus a carbon life form.
Easter eggs are in throughout.
And and which, so just so we can establish the members of the crew, we have James T. Kirk, who is the captain, Spock, who is of course the second in command and head science. He's
the science officer, yeah.
Head science officer, and then McCoy Bones, who is
he's the chief medical officer.
Chief medical officer. So like that. So you already have the credentials. It's like we're kind of seeing the argument back and forth. Spock is hypothesizing, using basically scientific method to kind of come to kind of a guesstimation as to what could be happening, with Bones chiming in about the impossibility of such a thing from a medical standpoint or physiological standpoint, at least as far as he knows, with Kirk in between trying to come to a consensus.
Well, and the thing that I think a lot of people lose, especially with all the caricatures of the original series, is people don't really pay attention to the fact that Kirk was an amazing captain. There's a lot of stereotypes about the overacting or whatever, which was all very common at the time, that people don't really notice that.
Honestly, for that era, William Shatner is subdued.
Very much so.
I was just going to say that from out of that entire era, I would say the prime cast of Star Trek are the most subdued of all the actors at the time, because I was shocked and astounded by how many of them had this pseudo blue collar newsman, newsboy sort of cadence to their voice whenever they delivered any line whatsoever, and it's great to see the dichotomy, because now I look at the crew of the original series, and now I don't judge Kirk so harshly. Now I can kind of see, oh, okay, well then I see how you were playing it, why you were playing it that way.
Yeah, and then one of the other things that I really do like about this episode is a little bit later on, Spock gets a bit emotional with regards to what they're dealing with, and he's trying to make his case. He steps on Kirk's toes and he starts giving orders that Kirk didn't give. They're going out to try and kill this creature that's been, murdering the miners, and Spock adds in, but capture it if you can. And so Kirk pulls him aside and he's talking to him and he's like, hey, that's not an order that I gave. And he says, I don't want you to be down here. I want you to go back and to guard they had a piece of the reactor stolen, so he wants him to go back and take care of that. And Spock effectively argues as to why he should be there. And there's a lot of logic to his argument. And he does use math and statistics and all that other stuff to kind of prove his point. And so Kirk, he does take that into consideration, and he does allow him to stay. And you don't get a lot of that kind of back and forth conversation as to why it's a logical decision. And like, especially in Discovery, nobody really sits there and talks about stuff like that. Nobody kind of goes, okay, well, let's look at the situation. Let's talk about it. Let's decide on what's the best route. We disagree with each other, but let's both present our sides of it, and then we'll decide what's the best course of action.
It's the philosophical debate, and I think it's also the debate of what you didn't hear in the conversation. Because normally what you would hear in the conversation is Kirk, normally what you would see in, in more contemporary shows is the person in charge questioning the ability for the person who defied their order to remain without bias. And, and normally that becomes a big thing.
Well, it's a combination of that. It's like, they're very much a team here, whereas more modern things would be like, no, but I'm the captain. This is what I'm saying that we do. Therefore, that's what we do.
And made to be confrontational.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and then what's interesting, like later in the episode, there's definitely a reversal where Spock tells Kirk, because Kirk gets basically trapped by the creature, and Spock tells Kirk, it's like, you shoot it because he's in trouble. But Kirk, in the midst of the situation, sees that, the creature isn't. It's kind of sizing him up, and then it's not, and then it kind of settles and doesn't make any overt threats. They're just kind of across from one another, almost as if it's waiting for like them to kind of deal with each other in a more civilized manner.
Well, in that too, you also see Kirk does employ kind of a scientific method there. Mm-hmm. He goes through the process of, he holds up his phaser, it backs away, he puts down his phaser, it comes closer. And so they do kind of test each other out like that, and they test the waters and see kind of what's going on. And they do take the time to establish the fact that he was weighing whether or not it was safe to be there with the creature before Spock even shows up.
Yeah. And then but like that, I guess like we can see like Spock did want to try and save the creature, but in that moment of, oh, my best friend and captain is in danger, he's telling him, shoot.
Yeah.
Because this thing has already killed one of their security team. Oddly enough, not the one black guy on the team. I think that was.
Look, this is a progressive show.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, once again, this was an era where if you didn't want to die, turn to sci-fi.
I remember when we saw like the whole team of red shirts, we were all just like, yeah, which one's gonna be the statistic?
I literally said, you're all going to die, yeah. All of you, and sure enough, only one bit it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, don't go it alone.
Yeah.
And the rest got jumped by the miners.
They did. The miners.
They kind of got mollywopped a little bit.
Yeah. They were getting
good Starfleet training there.
They got that the mob. The miners got a little bit of the mob mentality going, and they riled each other up a little bit.
They killed our people.
Understanding. I mean, at that point they'd lost about 50 miners.
Yeah.
But again, another thing about this is that you have these miners who are obviously very upset. They've been very scared. They've been kind of traumatized this whole time.
You can tell
waiting for the Enterprise to come.
Color-coded jumpsuits.
they jump the Enterprise security team and they rush over to where Kirk and Spock and McCoy are dealing with the creature, the Horta, and they're about to kill it. And Kirk goes, "No." He's like, "Look, you guys killed thousands of the eggs. It's a mother protecting its children." And it's literally, they have a brief discussion and they see the logic in it and they're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah,
we get that.
Like they had an understanding, which, by the way, there was like introduced very early on, there was this like basically silicon ball, or it was like primarily silicon. And they said that, that we've just, when we dug deeper, because that's the thing, they'd been operating this mining colony for years, no problems whatsoever. Then they dug deeper, they broke into this new chamber, they found these like all these like basically silicon nodules is what they called them, and they started like just like destroying them because they were like worthless. They were just like, oh, these are just like giant beads of silicon, well, we don't need this, and they would just kind of like throw them away. Like unbeknownst to them, those were an entire species that they were essentially wiping out, because it's like just a part of the species life cycle. And that's why the creature, the Horta, was fighting back. Because if they didn't stop this...
preservation of the species.
Yeah,
so it all... you sit there and you get both sides of the story finally, because... And that is another thing, too, is before Spock does do the mind meld, Kirk talks to him about it. Because you remember I told you guys that it was, like, a big deal
to
go and do that. And he talks about, it being a great, you lower the barriers of the mind, and it's a hugely personal thing, and it can be very like not necessarily a pleasant experience.
Well, it's like in Spock would like got in pain because like earlier in the episode they had encountered the creature. Both Spock and Kirk had shot the creature and had damaged it, and so it was at that current point like injured.
Yeah, well, and they don't go super into detail into it either, but at the same time that Spock was peering into the creature's mind, the creature was also peering into his mind.
Yeah,
and it learned a great deal about them when he was doing that. So it's kind of two sides of the coin. It's like, yeah, you get to figure out what this person's doing, but they also get to find out, exactly what you're doing, what you're feeling, what you know. And so it's a two-way street kind of thing, and they've kind of forgotten that.
Yeah, I think that like it's definitely like ideas like this or a series like you could definitely tell Star Trek was geared very, very specifically for episodic storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Like it took advantage of the medium far more than anything else, which has helped shape in a lot of ways what Star Trek is, but it also like Star Trek's philosophy of, we're going to go out, we're going to think through our problems as opposed to punch our way through. Like that's not how Starfleet is supposed to act. And even in like, like Ben Sisko, the punchiest of the Star Trek captains, did not resort to punching first and foremost. That was not his first option. It was just, if I get to start punching, I'm really good at this option, but I'm not going to take that option.
Yeah.
No, they always try and find as many ways as possible to come to a non-violent solution that's going to suit everybody.
Absolutely. And is that kind of philosophical dueling which was indicative of its era, because people were still trying to have civil debates, not based on what you were doing in your basement, not what you're doing at home, but what are we doing here together? So we don't have to agree on any of our personal shit, but what are we doing together, and how can we agree on that? And that's obviously eroded both in real life and on television. But at the same time, I can see how that happened, because once again, no conflict, no television, or no conflict, no story, rather. So they've had to figure out ways to gin up that conflict. But sadly, when you gin up conflict, you also lose a few essential things as well.
Well, and that's kind of something that I think almost, the nature of television now, where there is so much streaming, where you do get bulk amounts of episodes at once, where there are no kind of, natural commercial breaks in the episode, you are going to lose a lot of that style of storytelling, where like this, I'm sure you guys noticed there's really strong act outs every time they went to like where a break would have been. So there's a lot of really strong cliffhangers. Everything kind of wraps up at the end. And you're not obviously going to have that with a story where this story kind of continues. But I think a good example of where that worked well was like Battlestar Galactica. Battlestar had really strong kind of act breaks, and it was kind of a continuous story. But at the end of each episode, they still had that they wrapped up stories really well within the episode, and they continued other stories really well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is you can do within a serialized format. I mean, technically speaking, novels are the exact same way.
Yeah.
Like you could take a look at chapters as episodes, and you still end every single one with a cliffhanger to get somebody to move on to the next chapter. Which like that, I guess like if you have like a show that is like a little too overwrought or a little too overblown, maybe that is harder to do.
Right.
But then again, like at the same time, it's not impossible to do.
No, it isn't.
I think it's just like weaker writing, honestly. I mean, you have, if we're going with books, there's so many books where it's not been, an issue. And I just think that they're just not putting the same kind of work in, or I don't know what's missing from it, that they're not getting the same kind of delivery.
Well, once again, I don't think it's weaker writing. I think it has refined to other methodologies of storytelling, of having to serve several different masters. If you want to afford the ability to tell these kinds of stories and posit these philosophies, you're going to have to give more people overall what they want, because it can't be. It's definitely not lost on me how much of a niche the original series was when it first aired.
It wasn't, though. That's the thing.
I'm just saying by comparison.
I think honestly one of the issues that they did run into with Star Trek, why it was, canceled so early, was that they didn't realize so many people were watching it and so many different people were watching it.
Right.
I mean, if they had the actual numbers, I think they've proven that it was one of the biggest shows on television at the time. It's just nobody wanted to admit that they were watching it because it was such a
Except for Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
Who basically told Michelle Nichols, "Don't quit, do not leave that show."
Yeah.
But I do think
I mean,
that
people had the Nielsen box on a different TV so that it wasn't tracking that they were watching it.
Yeah, no, their technology of refining how you track these numbers definitely wasn't sophisticated back then. But I do think that that wasn't the case of weaker writing happening today. I think it's just different writing being applied to this show. And I think there are other sort of priorities that are happening in television that aren't going towards Star Trek right now. I think during the era of Star Trek, the world's sort of zeitgeist was about space and exploration. Unfortunately, the world's zeitgeist is not about space and exploration right now. If anything, it's because it's going in the exact opposite direction, with the exception of a few mavericks that are still keeping that flame.
Well, I think the other thing too is kind of like what John was saying earlier, where there's not as much to have worked with, as far as like the backgrounds and like the the monsters and the makeup and that kind of thing. So they couldn't rely on that to get a solid story across. Now there's CGI and everything else, so you don't, it's flashing lights and lens flares and there's other stuff to distract you, whereas there it was very bare bones.
Extremely.
Yeah, well, I know they say we're in the golden age of television, and it's like we do have a lot of fantastic shows out, but I think the thing that helps within the 60s, we actually were in a golden age of
humanity.
Sci-fi. Well, sci-fi writers and the short story was still a viable format at that time, and there were a lot like this is the time in which certain like writers like Philip K. Dick, Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein. I am missing, no doubt. I possibly Harlan Ellison. I think that might have been a little bit. I think Ellison might have been a little bit later. But there's a lot of like, Kurt Vonnegut were all working at this time, and those were incredible writers. So you had, specifically working within the genre, you had some of the best writers of the times working within the genre that was getting no recognition because it was considered a low form of entertainment.
Well, and I think the other thing too,
and TV was still not considered high on the bar of high art either. So you had a science fiction which had always been considered a low form of entertainment. Yeah. It was a low form of entertainment on a low considered medium. Right.
So like
I think another thing too that kind of contributes to that is we were talking about what the people, like the actors, were doing before they came on the show. Like James Doohan was in the military. Like there's so many people that had different kind of backgrounds before they came to this, and I think the writers as well had done other things before they came to writing. They whether they were in the military or done different careers or whatever, I think they just had a greater wealth of experience to draw from. And I think a lot of the writers that we have now have just been writers.
Again,
which is there's nothing wrong with that.
No, but I don't think that's entirely accurate either. I mean, you have a lot of war-based shows, you have a lot of politics-based shows, and you have a lot of medical-based shows, and not to mention police, drama, and procedurals that are coming from source materials. So not all writers of today are not coming from no experience. I think.
I'm just thinking that a large portion of them are.
No, just because industries have evolved. I mean, obviously, you're talking about a medium where when they were making this show, they didn't have Steadicams. It was literally just what they had available from the equivalent of a Home Depot to make a dolly and to use this equipment that is so heavy. Whereas now everything has gotten so refined that now you have these entire industries all geared around one piece of equipment, and now you have writers who are geared around, are you a genre writer? Are you a procedural writer? Are you more network? Are you more cable? are you more web series? Are you more streaming? So now everything has been so heavily labeled and categorized that now TV is almost suffering from the fact that it's become so nuanced and bifurcated that now it's the challenge of let's make sure that you have all of those people that have that wealth of lived life experience, whether you were a cop, a doctor, a lawyer, in the military, and what have you, and applying that to what you're writing.
I think we've come back around to a point where there's a stigma with the science fiction stuff again.
Always.
Like I was talking to someone about, Sci-Fi Channel has like The Magicians now, which has been a really solid show. And there's a lot of really great sci-fi shows that are coming out that are really, again, Battlestar Galactica was great. Like Westworld is technically a genre show.
Definitely.
I've heard The Expanse is a very, very interesting show.
Yep. That one too.
The Expanse. You've got Legion, which is really good.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of these really great genre shows, but they don't, when was the last time, besides Lord of the Rings, yeah, and they get like lots of the, special effects awards and stuff, but when was the last time a genre film actually got any kind of like recognition as far as like widespread recognition?
With the exception of this year's Shape of Water, and then
which was shocking.
What else? I mean, The Dark Knight won, but again, that was posthumously for Heath Ledger. It's with the exception of like you were saying, if it ain't a costume, if it's not,
there's still very much kind of the stigma that
very much so.
The science fiction stuff and the fantasy stuff doesn't have the same kind of, gravitas, or it's not quite as
of high art.
Yeah, it's not quite as, eloquent or as well respected as some of the other products that or films that come out, TV shows that come out.
Even though it asks the same questions that quote unquote straight shows that just don't have any of that talk about.
Well, I think the what it comes down to is that they talk about the steps, like when like the steps away from reality. So like when you're already watching a television show, even if it is a like a cop drama or a quote unquote realistic drama, everybody is being asked to take a small step out of reality because it is a fictional story.
Right.
So you're asking to take a small step. So if when you're doing a sci-fi or you're doing a fantasy show, you're setting it in a world that is not the world that the audience lives in. So they have to take an additional step. But which is understandable why that would lose some people. But like, at least for me, like one of the things I've always noticed that is weird for me and is weird that I noticed that sci-fi shows do try to address is people's perspective on themselves. Because usually show like Buffy or Angel, where it was like a cardinal sin to kill a human being. Like you couldn't kill a human being at all. It's always wrong to kill a human being, but you can murder the hell out of any demon in whatever gruesome way you want.
Special ways.
Yeah, and even if that demon wasn't like, if they were just like a dude who just wasn't human. And there were some demons that were just dudes who just weren't humans, and there were some humans who were colossal assholes, but you couldn't kill a human.
Yep.
And that always never sat right with me, and it was just because it's like the special case was just the fact that they were a human, that therefore made it sacred, even though they were a colossal asshole. But sci-fi shows like Doctor Who and Star Trek do posit that, humanity is not a consequence of DNA. It's a consequence of choices and a consequence of attitude. For lack of a better term, your humanity is not decided by something as simple as your genetics. It is decided by your morality and your actions, which is what has always drawn me to those shows. But I find that there's a lot of people that's what they don't connect with about it, is because this thing is non-human, but we are treating it as if it is.
Well, and that's, this episode does that because, they have this creature and they're reacting violently to it because, as far as they know, it's just this murderous creature. And then once they realize that it does have humanity, that it is a very kind creature, that it's a very empathetic creature.
And highly intelligent.
A highly intelligent creature, then they're like, okay, well, maybe we weren't maybe it wasn't in the wrong. Maybe we were the ones in the wrong. How can we work together?
Yeah, which the characters in the show can do that, and obviously the writers and many of the fans of the series do think that way. But you and I have met people in real life that would not understand that, and we know that. We've met people that wouldn't be like, well, it's just an alien thing. It looks like a dude in an emptied out beanbag chair, which in all likelihood it probably was.
I'm willing to posit that it was actually, I'm willing to posit that it was actually like a model car.
It was a highly advanced piece of puppetry, man.
Yeah, I know. I seriously, I almost, with the exception of when you saw the jump scares of when it kind of jumped towards up in frame, I'm willing to posit that it was actually, like a larger RC car with this shit on top of it that just moves left and right.
You know, with this show, they had little things on this show that were mind-boggling, right?
Yeah.
So take the doors, for example.
Right.
Electric doors weren't a thing then.
No.
Okay, they literally had somebody standing off screen waiting for a cue to pull the door open.
Pull and push.
So, I mean, even things as little as that were like mind-blowing on this show.
The one thing that did stick out to me, though, that was odd was the fact that the head miner guy,
He had a button under his desk that he had to push to open the door.
No, not that. What threw me off was the fact that he had to pull out this chart, and like it took him 2 vigorous pulls. I'm like, wait a minute, man. Wait, they couldn't put a PA back there or a grip just to push the sucker out to kind of keep with it? Like I took issue.
Look, they had a very detailed map that had been put together a year ago.
I get that. I'm just saying, you're telling me that there's someone not behind the set.
Do you not have
with a stick?
Your like world history class, your geography class, where they had that big ass map that they pulled down in front of the blackboard?
In the era of the early 20th century.
You remember how many times it took your teacher to get the right map down?
I get that. What I'm saying is, you couldn't put someone behind there to kind of just give it a nudge out?
Your teacher didn't put someone behind the blackboard just to help with the map?
But she had a hook though, and a little string to help her pull it down. She had help. It's just all the things that were consistent. That was the one thing I was like, wait, come on.
Of all the things in the show, that's the one thing that snagged with you.
It's the only thing actually.
Okay. Well, I guess we should do things that did snag with you about this episode.
Well, I am curious though, what happened to the silicone ball that was on his desk? Because he has a child on his desk now.
Look,
like I'm very curious.
Well, you noticed when they came back later, it wasn't there, right?
Yeah. Well, lucky for him, it wasn't. I was like, it's going to hatch, right? So it's going to tunnel through something. So
I'm pretty sure he went upstairs to his office, took that, and brought it back
as quickly as fucking possible, because it's going to start burrowing through shit.
There was an affection that the miners had after that.
They were so warm now. It's like the guy almost had his feet up on the desk. He's like, hey, they're all so cute.
He's like, we're not worried. Those little guys are already tunneling.
Oh, little guys.
Our jobs just got so much easier. We're going to make so much more
money or whatever the currency is now. We're gonna be rich.
Things are looking good for everybody involved at the end of this episode.
Especially Spock, who pointed out that, well, the Horta found me hot, thought you guys were ugly.
Look, sucks to be y'all.
He didn't want to break it to the Horta that his Vulcan ears were not a human trait.
The rest of you are hideous. But I can get used to it.
Look, the Horta thought she could get used to humans. They weren't exactly, attractive, but they could grow on her. It was fine.
You guys don't crawl on the ground. You guys walk around like little pegs. What's wrong with you?
Well, I did like the ending of the episode with McCoy and Kirk.
You got 2 of my all-time favorite Star Trek quotes in this episode.
Oh yeah, just giving little jabs at Spock. It just reminded me of so many of the times that they've given little jabs at Tuvok on Voyager, and I was just like, oh, this is a grand tradition of kind of giving.
Yeah,
the
they're like,
shit.
It's like, oh, can't show emotion? Guess what? I'm gonna start fucking with you.
It was, Spock. It's a very human kind of reaction that you have there. He's like, I see no reason to stand here and be insulted.
I see vanity. Essentially, Spock. Kirk was saying, you're feeling that, right? She gave you a compliment. Now you're feeling good about yourself. Huh? Okay, good. Yeah, feel good about yourself. Okay, good.
And you got Bones proclaiming that he might just be able to cure a rainy day. He's achieved that level of mastery.
No big ego there, Frankenstein. Yeah. Yeah, no big ego there. Bring it down, McCoy. Bring it down, Bones. All right, you applied some advanced epoxy. Chill the fuck out. Chill.
Yeah, that's so to help heal the injured Horta, Bones applies.
It's actually cement. It wasn't even epoxy.
No, it was a silicon based cement that they used to build structures. Shelters.
Yeah, kind of like a Habitat for Humanity kind of thing.
Yeah, because the Federation is full of scientists and humanitarians.
And builders.
Just in case you weren't aware.
And builders, yes. And
I wasn't.
Exactly.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's a very. I really do feel like it's a basic thing that it's much easier to talk about the space battles and the what kind of ship are we making now, or what kind of phaser are we making now? That's easy to design, but it can get, what gets lost is that philosophical need of, we're still figuring it out too. We're just helping you figure out as well.
Yeah, and I mean, Greg, you expressed concern about watching the original series. Specifically because you said you didn't like the style and the pace of older television was something that you got hung up on.
Yeah, my greatest concern was pace because of other episodes that I had seen. But this one was definitely an exception.
What about you, John?
Also to a different time. The last time I saw the original series was, I think I was in middle school the last time I ever saw the original series.
Much shorter attention span, I would think, in middle school. What about you, John? Because you've seen like one or two episodes of the original series.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a concern for me, was not only just because the one or two episodes of the original series, although the one or two that I saw I did enjoy, and I don't think they were all that. I think the pace was kept mostly consistent, but I was mostly concerned because I had watched many of the classic Who episodes, and so many of them, the pacing in that is very, very kind of dull, but it also was like British television was also working with a
even less
budget.
money.
Yeah, less of a budget
than
American television, so that could be a factor in with it.
I mean, for those shows, you really had to sit with the philosophical question of the episode. I mean, you really have to sit with it.
Yeah. Well, not only that, like the Brits have a far more of a connection to live theater than Americans do. So there's a little bit more of more talking like you would see in stage theater than there is, within American filmmaking, which was, which started in the silent era and had such greats as Chaplin, Keaton, and Lloyd. Making the most watched media of the time.
Yeah. So, I mean, was there anything that, with the Discovery episodes, you kind of go through and do things that you didn't like about the episode? Was there anything that you didn't like about this episode?
What I do appreciate is, see, interestingly enough, though, both shows are doing something that I tend to miss from all the other contemporary shows, and that's, this could definitely be the exception because they're working with minors, so they fill that character void. But typically, I enjoy any Star Trek episode that involves as many of the core crew as possible on all aspects, and does examine those different storylines that have going on. Interestingly enough, both this episode and several Discovery episodes really do keep it fairly tight and isolated amongst 2 or 3 or 4 core characters, and we're not entirely sure what's going on with everyone else. So as far as storylines go, it's really the one storyline, and I'm always curious to know what's going on in the ship, what else is happening, and that's one adventure that I've enjoyed, is the addition of the branching off of different storylines.
Well, I think like the thing that we saw within the original series as opposed to Discovery. So Discovery was not really supposed to be about the bridge crew. It was supposed to be about these people that are really running the spore drive and centered really around Michael Burnham. But the problem is that because Lorca was the captain, and then suddenly Burnham and all of them were suddenly on the bridge a lot more often, then we were seeing the bridge crew, and they didn't know how to really incorporate them, or at least it felt like they didn't know how to do that. But but with
always curious. Like, so what are you up to? What are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
What do you do?
But
You back there? What are you doing?
Yeah, but the original series was about primarily the bridge crew. And that's where we were spending most of our time, was on the bridge. And so that's who we were spending most of our time with, was the bridge crew. Whereas like in Discovery, it was like we weren't spending most of our time in the spore drive chamber, at least, I mean, a little bit at first.
Right.
But then they tried to bring us up to the bridge. They wanted us back on the bridge, but we weren't getting to know the bridge.
Because of the stories that they were telling, it didn't work with how they set the show up.
Yeah.
Like, if they would have set the show up as differently, but the way, the stories they were telling, the plot that was unfolding, like, that's something that you need to be up in the action. And, the bridge is where all that action is unfolding. That's where you're seeing everything. That's where you're dealing with everything. If they were having different stories that were more, if they're having more character-based stories, if they're having, less was going on kind of on the outside, like there wasn't this big set piece of the war, if there wasn't this big set piece where they jumped around in time and you were just dealing with the crew on the ship, then it would have worked better and you wouldn't have had to spend all that time on the bridge. So, I mean, the style of, like, the storytelling did get away from them because they built this massive kind of set piece on the outside, and then you can't say that there's this huge war happening and then never show it. You can't never talk about it. You can't never have it be a thing that's in the show.
Which is, again, like what the original series really embraced, the notion of episodic storytelling, and it really, really knew how to work it to its favor. I don't know how much of actual writing Roddenberry did on the original series.
He was a showrunner. It depends episode to episode. There were some episodes that he did write.
This one he did. This one he did not write.
Yeah.
No.
But I'm sure Roddenberry had really, really embraced the episodic nature of it, but he had a lot of examples. When I was saying this is one of the golden ages of short story writing, and I'm not kidding you, this was kind of at the tail end when writing short stories could still be a profitable thing that they were selling in magazines. So there were a lot of precedents, and he grew up with those pulp novels and those weekly sorts of stories where the story continues on. So he had a lot of basis for it. And then he was also, lest we forget, he was working with one of the greatest television makers of all time, Lucille Ball. This was, she was the one that was making the decision to greenlight this thing. There's no doubt in my mind that Lucille would stick her head in every once in a while. She did have one of the most successful sitcoms of all time. Yeah. So,
Well, and then this series too, I mean, one thing that I do love about the nature of it is that you can jump in anywhere and just watch an episode, and you don't need to have the context of the rest of the series to enjoy the episode. True. You don't need, you are familiar with kind of the basic characters, but you don't need to know what's going on to just watch a random episode. And you can sit there and you can enjoy the episode and you can get the full story, and you're not missing anything.
Yeah. True. Which I think with and to kind of go back with Discovery, I don't think they truly embraced the serialized format that they were, going with.
It was in this weird sort of in between. They didn't want to do the kind of segment or the standalone episodes like this, but they also didn't really have a driving plot for it, or I don't know how to describe it. But
I think that they misjudged about how much of part of the true nature of Star Trek episodic storytelling was, because I think that I don't think Star Trek has to be episodic. I just think it always has been episodic, because that has been the nature of television.
And if anything, I think it's a case study in looking at shows that handle this nexus very well in terms of the tradition of being a long-running franchise, that has always been one way, and then now trying to evolve it or change it into another way, but then running into those hiccups of, well, we used to do this, but we're doing this now, but we used to do this, but we're doing this now. shows that have successfully actually made that arch over, but it took them several years to do it, because it had to be gradual. Were long running shows like like SVU, Law and Order's franchise SVU. I mean, initially, if you watch season 1 to this past season, you're looking at a significant change, because it goes from primarily episodic to episodic, but heavily serialized elements, and that's because
there's a lot of character stories that kind of tied across the episodes.
Yeah, because you're talking about shows that have been on for over a decade, so now you're talking about overarching character, personalities and different wits that are changing. So with a franchise like Star Trek, I think because they've never had a show go beyond 7 seasons, that they've never had to run into that issue of, well, what happens when we try and make that arch over into more serialized things.
I mean, they kind of did, though, especially when they started doing the movies and stuff, because you didn't have, I mean, the movies are still all standalones, but there was a lot of the stories that tied across, like you took what happened with Picard and the Borg,
Mm-hmm.
that echoes throughout the rest of the series, throughout the movies.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that keeps coming back. So, I mean, with this one, you had Kirk dealing with the Klingons. That was something that kind of echoed through and that continued coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And Deep Space Nine, at least towards its end run, did get more serialized.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that was like towards its end run. But like you could tell that they made a little bit more of that decision. But it was also like there were bigger elements kind of at play.
And it was also very super gradual. It was very, very gradual. And when you have 20 plus episodes a year to do that, it feels less like a jolt than like a steady nudge.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that I think I think does help it out a lot. But it's also, a lot of those shows were coming in, like, especially in like the mid, like, the early to mid to late 90s. It's like you could potentially pick up the series on VHS if you wanted to. You could buy individual episodes. So if you missed one, it wasn't as big. It wasn't as big of a deal. Like back in the 60s,
they were still doing
when
that.
syndication still wasn't really a thing. They didn't do reruns.
One and done. That
for
was
a while. It was like, if you missed that episode,
hear about it from your friend.
that's about it. That is the best you could hope for.
That's
so
it.
it was a lot more important for these episodes to be far more self-contained, because of like, you missed a vital piece of information in that last episode.
Well, I think you're forgetting TV Guide was a thing.
Well, yeah, that's true. But there's a world of difference between reading the plot point and seeing.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, it was still an option.
Yeah, I mean, commerce has had a very big effect on just how we tell stories as well. Commerce and how commerce affects technology and how technology affects commerce. I mean, what? We were trying to watch this on DVD, then we realized,
None of us have a DVD player.
Yeah, we have laptops that don't have the drive anymore because commerce said we needed a new laptop. Okay, got a new laptop, but what does that mean?
Look, it's lighter, it's slimmer.
And what does that mean? Now you got to stream it. So get on the Netflix and so now you. And so I almost feel like, if you're on that Netflix platform, when you're imagining a show, the question is, okay, we're on Netflix.
I'm just worried about the thousands of dollars of DVDs that I just realized I haven't been watching for a reason.
Oh, well yeah. I just think that's a matter of, getting yourself a nice little, super drive or whatever.
Or something.
DVD ROM.
You just sort it out, man. It's just gathering
accessories
dust.
To
I thought
plug
it was
in.
just because I didn't have time, and then I realized.
Keep one in your car, keep one in your office, keep one at home. They're cheap enough now. Like you kind of plug and play with them. So.
Yeah.
Holy crap! I just realized I have all of Cowboy Bebop on DVD.
Yeah.
And that
Right.
may be the only, and at a certain point, that's going to be the only true medium for me to watch that show, and it's a fantastic show.
Yeah. There are still, recordings that have.
It is on Amazon right now.
See,
Just
on
saying.
VHS. I mean, it's whether I'll go back to them, and I have no idea. But I used to do that whole
I'm
VHS
just saying,
record
Netflix
thing.
has a rotating catalog.
Yeah.
Okay,
So even with that, and when you're able to binge watch,
go analog, man.
it changes it changes everything. Yeah.
The difference was that you had to get up and go and change the DVD.
Absolutely. Going from binge watching from previously being analog changes the very nature of the viewing experience, but also what we've been seeing is also it changes the very nature of how shows are even developed. You know what it made
better? You don't have to accidentally fall asleep and get stuck on the super loud DVD menu. Just looping the same like 5 bars of music over and over and over again.
Yeah, no, I mean that definitely did wake me up, and I rather fall asleep. I was like, oh, hello menu.
You're like, how long have I been asleep?
The movie's been over for a while. Okay.
All right. So
final thoughts. I mean, this is I told you guys it took me a while to kind of pick which episode I wanted to show you.
Why did you pick this episode?
So I love the original series. Like I was attempting to make you guys watch the entirety of it, but you protested.
We don't necessarily protest.
I just know we got lives and we got work. I just know a greatest hits will have more of an effect.
So I mean, there was a lot of episodes that I strongly considered making you watch. I did consider doing Space Seed just because it is so iconic and just because I do love it.
It is a great episode. I have seen that one.
It is a great episode. There's a fantastic episode called Charlie, and it's the 60s and 70s trope of the evil child kind of comes to life in that one. It's a great episode. There's a great one where his name is kind of failing me right now, but the actor comes back and plays Spock's father for the majority of the series and the movies, actually plays a Romulan captain, and they do a bit of a game of cat and mouse where, the Romulans keep cloaking and the Enterprise is trying to get away, and it was kind of inspired by the submarine dramas that they used to have, you know?
And also, the era, I mean, the what was happening in real life during,
Yeah, it was like the Cold War.
Yeah, so many of those cat and mouse games would happen.
Yeah, I mean, that was an option. There was, Mudd's Women I considered just because you guys did love seeing Harry Mudd so much when he did show up in Discovery. I mean, there's The Trouble with Tribbles obviously would have always been a great episode, but it's, there's certain episodes, like, there's ones that people have seen, even, if they're not familiar with the original series, that they've seen, like Space Seed, like The Trouble with Tribbles.
Right.
Whereas one like this, which was one of my favorite episodes, I don't think, had either of you seen this one? Like, I know, John, you hadn't seen this one before.
I had not seen this one.
I had not seen this one. This one, for me, was very different in how kind of covered all the philosophical points.
It's a really really well-rounded episode.
Well-rounded episode.
Thank you.
What? Did you drink too much Alwamore? You're like, what's going on?
No, I'm fine. I only had a little bit.
So you didn't drink enough.
I didn't drink enough, man. I left it at John's house and he was sipping away while we were gone.
Not a lot. I had
so the answer was yes.
You know what? Shut up. All right.
That's
what you get for leaving liquor at my place. All right? Fine.
This episode had some horror elements. You had some of your hard science fiction elements. You had some really great character moments. You had some comedy elements. You showcased a lot of the different characters, a lot of the different ways that they're trying to solve problems. There's a lot going on in this one little episode.
I would say that this episode, my thoughts on it are definitely that I really, really got to see the basic DNA for a Star Trek episode. It was great to kind of see like, oh yeah, this is the foundation. This is upon which all other episodes of all other series are really created off of, which is fascinating in and of itself to me. But it also kind of showed like this was the bones of Trek, and this is what Trek is kind of all about. This is also why it became the phenomenon that it became.
Yeah.
Now, and then having seen one of my favorite episodes, how does that color your reflection on my violent reaction to the new series?
I mean, it definitely makes a lot of sense.
It flies in the face of convention. I mean, and I think for better or for worse, that's that's what they were going for, to fly in the face of a convention. And I think that when you do that, you have to. When you do that, you have to not only commit to it, but also accept whatever comes when you do commit to it. I'm all for when someone makes a choice. And
I don't think they've committed to it.
But if you go in and you're trying to keep one leg in the future and one leg in the past, that's when you can. It's like doing that sack race. That's when you can trip yourself up. Because if you're not focusing on being coordinated by moving forward, then you will trip yourself up.
I do think that's one of the places that the new series is kind of struggling, though, is it's not committing to a certain style of show. It's not committing to a certain kind of, the main characters change. Like, it's the same actor, it's the same character theoretically, but they've changed her and rewritten how she reacts and behaves so many times that it doesn't make sense anymore.
Well, I think like just going in. So DS9, of course, is like Greg and mine's favorite Trek series.
Yeah.
And it was deliberately set up to kind of to be
it was the anti-Star Trek.
It was the anti-Star Trek because like you weren't on a ship, you were on a space station, you were in this fixed location. It dealt with religion primarily,
and also the idea of religion, demilitarized zones, and what is terrorism and who is a terrorist.
Yeah, and it also it the whole point of it was like we are going to take these Starfleet ideals, but the whole point was like this was supposed to be different from the rest of Starfleet. This location was different for all of these different reasons.
Well, and then something else that kind of talks about is, Space Seed, you'd get Khan, you get his, they go off on the Botany Bay, they leave, we never think about him again. That's it, we're done. And then in the second movie, Chekhov is on that planet with his captain. He's in a completely separate ship, completely separate crew at that point. Mm-hmm. He shows up. He doesn't even remember the system. He doesn't remember like how many planets were in the system. He doesn't really remember leaving them there until he sees the name of the ship. And it kind of, he's like in the Wrath of Khan, Chekhov is sitting there and he's like, why do I know what this is? Why do I know what this is? Mm-hmm. And then by the time it occurs to him, he's like, oh my God, we have to leave. Like, I know what this is. I know what's going on here. Mm-hmm. It's too late by the time he actually remembers what's going on. So you take something like that and they just, they marooned Khan on this planet, which at the time was totally livable. Mm-hmm. It was a great planet. It was fine. Mm-hmm. The other planet blew up. That planet got decimated, but nobody from the Federation ever came back to make sure they were still okay. Nobody ever came back to check on them to make sure everything was fine. Mm-hmm. They were there for 20 years, 30 years. Like his crew had children at that point who'd grown up solely on that planet. Mm-hmm. So, that's one of the first times you see the consequences of them bouncing around the galaxy, just like, fixing something, leaving, changing something, leaving. They don't think about it again. And then you get that as the example of when they actually did go back again. And you have Khan, who's been there, for 30 years, trapped on this planet, hating Kirk for leaving him there, for never coming back to check on them, for his wife died. Mm-hmm. And you get that kind of experience, and that's one of the first. It's like
cause and effect.
Yeah, it's a really huge cause and effect that we get. Mm-hmm. And so, like with Deep Space Nine, they're stuck in the one spot. Like they have to live with every decision that they make.
Yeah, I think it's there was also it's from season 2 is during the foundation of the Maquis, where Starfleet is essentially telling Benjamin Sisko how to deal with this Maquis thing, and it's just like, oh, why aren't you just talking with them? And he's just like, what the hell do you mean just talking with them? They don't want to talk. They want to blow everything up. And the Federation is just like, you're being stupid. You're not doing it right. Do it our way. And then he just basically, I'm paraphrasing. And then he turns.
No, it's a good paraphrase.
Yeah, but he turns to Kira and he says, the problem is Earth. It's easy to be. Is like he has that really really great line that it's Earth is paradise and it's easy to be a saint in paradise, and that's why they were too disconnected. Everything from within the core of the Federation, within on the Federation world was almost too perfect. They couldn't understand that when you get out to a
Yeah,
situation.
You know, the far reaches of the galaxy.
The far reaches of the galaxies that did not have the advantages of Earth, how there can be shades of gray, how you have to make morally questionable decisions, and you have to, you can't make everyone happy, no matter, like, there is no such thing as a perfect solution. Sometimes that guy over there is going to get screwed over, and you got to be able to live with that decision, because you didn't want to screw over that guy, but if you didn't screw over that guy, then you and yours would have been in a far worse place. So it kind of came down to, okay, there are two groups. One of these groups is going to get screwed. It's not going to be my group. And that's what the decision Cisco had to make multiple times, but
mainly because he learned the lesson the worst way possible.
Yeah.
What happens when you let yourself get screwed?
Yeah. But there were multiple times where, even though he made that decision to, like, all right, I'm going to keep me and mine safe, and that was the right decision, it didn't mean that there's not going to be consequences to that decision, that can't come back to bite you in the ass, and it did. On multiple episodes, we saw that come back around. But that was the point of DS9, and that's why it is a triumph, because it posited the exact same questions as Trek, but sort of allowed things to play out a little bit differently. What if let's examine this exact same situation, but let's throw in this additional variable factor, and how does that change it? Do things remain the same, or do they change?
Well, in that you get kind of in, I want to say it's like the third episode of Next Generation, when Q shows up and he holds the crew of the Enterprise on trial for all the crimes of humanity. He just rolls up and he's like, hey, guess what you guys did? It's like, oh, what's that? You're perfect now? Well, what about when you did, do you guys not remember this? And he goes through and he holds them accountable for everything.
Yeah, you're talking about genocides, eugenics wars,
there was
the whole
eugenics war. There's genocide. There was the phase where everybody was like high all the time. There was some dark stuff that they went through to get to the point where they are now. And
absolutely,
the kind of thing with them kind of going throughout the galaxy is that they're running into all these different planets and all these different races who are at different phases in that
and you're still putting
evolution.
Your finger in the dip,
which is one of the reasons why they do have the Prime Directive, is that they do want people to get to a certain point before they do make contact with them.
That's right.
So I mean, it's just something that's kind of missing, is that consideration that they have, that care that they have, is something that's kind of missing in this new series. Like, they don't kind of stop and think about their reactions. Like, you have Michael Burnham, who is, supposed to be the second in command, who's had zero experience, first of all, but she also kind of sticks her foot into everything and doesn't think about her actions at all. Pretty much everybody has to stop, in all of the different series, and Voyager especially, they're on the edge of space, they're struggling, they have kind of there's no backup for them. They can't mess up. They stop and think about their reactions. Like Enterprise, they stop and think about their actions. They're off all alone. They're the only ship out as far as they are. They have to stop and think about what they're doing.
Yeah,
Deep Space Nine, they're in a very volatile situation. They have to stop and think about what they're doing.
Yeah, no, I think the greatest thing about these Star Trek shows was that they were always indicative of their times. And
you know what? Times right now are a mess. This show is a mess. It all makes sense.
I think that if the original series covered how we were as a nation, and even the world over, dealing with the Cold War. Deep Space Nine in some ways was a reflection on how we were dealing with the first Iraq War, and how we were reconciling with humanity's inhuman behavior to itself. And then Deep Space Nine was dealing with, the effects. If to make an allegory, it was dealing with the effects of what does it mean to be at war, and what does it mean when you sit up on your high perch versus me and the rest of my crew are in a freaking foxhole having to deal with this shit. And then, Voyager is dealing with we're out on your own and making devil's bargains, and Enterprise is, well, we're the first. We're also making devil's bargains, which is going to affect the rest of you guys. And when we come to these new movies and these new shows, we're also looking at a time that, like what you were saying, is very, very confusing and very uncertain. Everything that we thought we knew about the quote unquote real world and goings on in our lives and politics and war and overseas has been upended. So it should be no surprise that what we're seeing in a show that reflects our common lives is also being upended, because what you thought you knew about real life was a lie. What you thought you knew about the show you've been watching for 30, 40, 50, 60 some odd years is being unraveled. And
I think that's
what's causing so much consternation.
I honestly think that would be a great story for them to be telling. I think that would be a great kind of premise and basis for the show. Like, it could be really strong.
Well, we theorized that this was going to be a Section 31 centric show, which would have examined a lot of that and could have been more interesting, and also could have explained why Michael Burnham was really there, even though we got the explanation later about mirror universe and then Space Hitler. But
it's the thing about this show that is so disappointing is the fact that there's so much potential and that it could be so good, and there's so many little things that could be brilliant.
And then therein lies also the hope of it, is that it does have. Well,
yeah, and that's why I'm still watching, man, because like the bones are there. It could very possibly become something.
Not because of the disco shirts, because I really like the disco shirts.
Look, the disco shirts were ruined for me.
I want to own a disco shirt.
Sometimes when you get the explanation, it's not what you wanted. Sometimes there's probably going to be somebody who's watching that or listening to that podcast going, "You dumbasses."
But there is one thing.
What do you mean you don't get it?
There is one thing though that after watching the episode from the original series, definitely tells me that and solidifies for me, because there was a while, over the last a few years or so where, many of our institutions have been failing us. If it's not, many of our schools, it's many of our institutions, it's many of our forms of higher learning, it's, things that we used to trust. And, I began to have a similar concern for the ideals behind Star Trek, which admittedly I really hold very, very close to my chest. But after watching an episode from the original series, it definitely reinstills my faith that no matter what happens with fan films, new series, new movies, animated series, I don't care what claymation, what you end up doing, video games on mobile phones, you cannot undo this brand and this philosophy. I don't care what you do. I don't care how hard you pull and push it and twerk it around or kickflip it. It's just like you're not going to.
Well, and this series was groundbreaking and like that for so many people on so many different levels. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have a woman who is third in command of the Enterprise.
A black woman
who is third in command of the Enterprise. There was men and women serving side by side. There was, Asian people. There was African American people. Like, there's so many different things happening on this, so we're so groundbreaking. It also
proved that whatever's going on in this Cold War, it's gonna end, because we have.
Yeah, because this is a potential that the future could be. This is what we could move towards, and so it was this kind of like, you guys were kind of saying it's like, oh, you love Deep Space Nine because it's like dark and it kind of goes and it does this exploration. But had Deep Space Nine come out before any of the other shows had come out, it wouldn't have had anywhere near the impact that it had.
Yeah, no, and that Deep Space Nine is definitely standing on the shoulder of giants.
Yeah,
but it does what you're supposed to do when you stand on the shoulder of giants. You take what was there and you hold it up to the light to see what still stands and what falls.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I think it works so well, is because it did have such a strong foundation to take a look at. To kind of step back and be like, okay, I get it. This is the utopia. Like, we don't use money. Everybody does work side by side. We do sit and talk about our issues. But like, what's the cost? What's the cost of that? Yeah. What's going on the sides to make this happen? What happens
when a check comes due?
Yeah.
Everyone's here sitting eating, but like someone's got to pay for this.
Look, everybody in the future is a vegetarian, but what had to happen for them to get to that point?
That's right.
That chicken sandwich is not real chicken.
That's right. They're all gone now.
chicken sandwich and coffee. There appears to be a triple in my chicken sandwich and coffee.
Again, another one of my favorite lines.
All right. So I think that wraps us up for this week. Thank you for introducing us to this
welcome.
lovely
You're
episode,
welcome.
Megan. I believe next week it is my call. So we're going to be watching Duet, the penultimate episode from Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Oh, damn it! You're going with Deep Space Nine? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I'm sorry.
You guys
Greg.
can't both pick Deep Space Nine.
I think I'm gonna have to, but if I can't, I'll pick something else. I mean, it's gonna be a long hiatus, so we gotta.
Look, okay.
There's gonna be a few
We've
repeats.
got the original series, we've got Deep Space Nine, we've got the Next
Okay,
Generation,
all right.
we've got the animated series, we've got Voyager, we've got Enterprise.
There is an episode of Voyager that I remember distinctly that really broke my heart, and
So I have this feeling that you guys are just going to be bouncing between Voyager and Deep Space Nine. Is that
It's
correct?
not- no.
Am I going to be covering the animated series, the original series, the Next Generation, and
Consi-
Enterprise all on my
No.
own?
No,
I'm
I'll throw in Enterprise.
And I'll throw in Next Generation. No, there are no. Even
You
though
definitely are on animated series. That
yeah,
one's
that's
all
all
you.
you.
It's so
That's-
good.
that's
It's
all
so
you.
good.
That is all you. Yes, but
Y'all
no.
are missing out.
No, but legit. No, I have some nuggets from Next Generation definitely, and yeah, Voyager for sure, because it definitely asked some very difficult questions
And the
did
movies.
some difficult things. Oh, and the movies
Because
as well.
you guys need to watch The Undiscovered Country.
Oh, and the movies as well. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Well,
Not because it's the best Star Trek movie, but because it asks the biggest questions.
Why does God need a starship?
Exactly.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys all. We'll see you guys all next week. Later.